My name is Dr. Joseph Crumbly. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and family therapist, and I'd like to welcome you to this training entitled The Inherent Strengths of Kinship Care. It's very special to me for three reasons. One, it allows me to recognize and even celebrate the strengths of kinship caregivers who are able to care for children that are not biologically theirs, and they're doing it in the absence of the birth parents. The second reason why I'm glad to be able to do this training is because it allows me to not only recognize, but to identify how you as caregivers, use your strength to protect, to nurture, and to stabilize the children in your care. And the third reason why this training is personal to me is because it also allows me to highlight for professionals and for child welfare agencies why these strengths are the reasons relative caregivers and kinship caregivers should be given preferential consideration over adoption and foster care when children are unable to stay with their birth parents. And let me repeat that. It allows me the opportunity to highlight for professionals and for child welfare agencies and organizations why these strengths are the reasons caregivers and kinship families should be given preferential consideration when children aren't able to stay with their parents. So let me describe this training for you. This training is divided into modules, 6 modules, and each module highlights a particular strength in kinship care. The first module will be looking at attachments. And when I'm talking about attachments, I'm talking about what's unique and significant about attachments between caregivers and their children, and why this is a strength, and why this attachment is so effective in kinship care. The second module is entitled Legacies. And in that module, I'll be talking about the strengths of kinship care as it relates to the sharing of traditions and values and history with the children between caregivers and birth parents, and why that's so significant. And also in that module, I'll also be able to talk about how you as a caregiver are able to interrupt cycles, create new legacies and new traditions so that you can break the cycles and the patterns that actually resulted in the children coming into your care. The third module is identity. And in that module, I'll be talking about how you as a caregiver prevent the loss of multiple identities that children experience in foster care. The identities related to culture and tradition and language and history. And in that one, I'll also be highlighting how you as a caregiver actually are involved in developing the identity of those children and being able to make sure that the children can avoid the types of decisions that resulted in them coming into care. The fourth module is entitled Healing. And in that module, I get a chance to talk about how you as caregivers can help the children recover from the losses and the trauma that results from separation from their birth parents. And I also am going to be highlighting how your sharing of your own personal losses as a relative and as kin to the birth parents also allows you to bond and attach with the children. In the fifth module, I'll be talking about adaptability. And in that one, I'll be talking about how kinship caregivers and how families within 24 to 72 hours are able to assume those roles and responsibilities so the children don't have to leave the families and go into care. In the sixth and final module, I'll be talking about co-parenting. And I'll be talking about that relationship between you as a caregiver with the birth parent that allows you to connect and develop a partnership, and how that pre-existing relationship is an advantage in terms of you being able to develop a partnership and co-parenting relationship with the birth parent. I'm also going to be talking about how to change the challenges that can come from that pre-existing history, and how we can make that relationship move from being a challenge to a positive asset in kinship families. So now, let's move to the topic of co-parenting. Now, in co-parenting, I'd like to talk about I have 3 specific goals. The first is to define co-parenting and what that means specifically for kinship families. And the second goal is to identify the strengths of co-parenting in kinship families. And the third is to provide approaches and challenges of changing those difficulties and addressing those difficulties and changing those difficulties to positives so that there can be positive co-parenting in kinship families. So let's start with the definition. The definition I'd like to share with you is that co-parenting is the shared responsibility of parenting between the kinship caregiver and the birth parent, as well as the extended family. Many of the things that I'm going to be talking about that are prerequisites and that are required in order for caregivers and birth parents to co-parent also apply to extended family as well. So let's talk about the strengths. The first strength that I think that's important that I'd like to highlight is that you as a caregiver don't have to get to know the birth parent. You share history. You share background. You share a relationship. In foster care and adoption, that history, that background, that relationship is not shared simply because the foster parent or the adoptive parent does not know the birth parent. You do know the birth parent. You do have that history. So you've got a foundation already for developing a co-parenting relationship. The second strength in kinship care is that both you and the birth parent have a relationship with the child. And when that co-parenting is organized and is in sync, it provides the child a double support because of their relationship with you as a caregiver and their relationship with the parent. Again, in foster care and adoption, it's very difficult simply because the child does not know that foster parent or that adoptive parent. They know you, and it's because they know you and their birth parent that they're going to have that double support that makes them feel safe and make them feel protected. The third advantage is that the caregiver and birth parents are mutually accessible to each other. There's no boundaries that get in the way of your relationship with that birth parent, other than the boundaries that relates to parenting. Let me be clear about that. Foster parents are trained to be professionals, and they are not to have a personal relationship with you. Adoptive parents, that's a relationship that they have to develop with you. For a caregiver, for you as a caregiver, it's a it's a personal relationship that you already have with the birth parent. I'll give you an example. That birth parent can give you a call and ask you, how are my kids doing? What are they up to? How can I support you? That birth parent cannot call the foster parent and say, how are my kids doing? They may not even have the telephone number to reach that foster parent. So that's what I'm talking about, accessibility. They've got accessibility to you by phone, by text. They've got accessibility to you as a family member, which allows you to have that connection with them. Foster parents do not have that accessibility because it's a professional relationship. Adoptive parents don't have that accessibility. They're not going to run into you on Thanksgiving. They're not going to run into you at church. They're not going to run into you at family reunions. You run into and you are involved with that birth parent on a personal relationship. Children can maintain relationships with you once they return to their birth parents. One of the sad things that I used to see, which is a loss that a lot of the children experienced, was that once they returned to their birth parents and birth families from foster care, there was a loss that they experienced, and the loss had to do with the attachment that they had developed with the foster parent. That attachment that you develop with them as a caregiver can carry over, even if there is reunification. They can still maintain that support. And there's also support that you have that the birth parent also enjoys. Foster parents are not involved in that birth parent's recovery. They're not involved in that birth parent's personal issues. They're not involved with that birth parent's handling of challenges. You as a relative caregiver, as kin, you are involved. You have a personal relationship with that birth parent. So not only are you a support to the children, you can continue being a support to that birth parent. For that birth parent, it's not a double loss because when they're working with foster families, it can be a double loss of support from the foster parent as well as support for the children. Co-parenting can continue if the children are not reunified with you. If by any chance the children are not reunified with their birth parents, they still have you. and that birth parent can still continue to follow through with the co-parenting partnership that you've already established prior to the children returning to them or prior to the children remaining with you. So what I'd like to do now is have you look at a video of me speaking with and doing some training with caregivers around co-parenting. And while you're watching this, I'd like you to think about some of the challenges that you're experiencing in co-parenting. I'd like you to think about what's working in co-parenting with the relative caregiver. And I'd like to think about what are the different roles. I'd like you to think about some of the different roles and relationships and prerequisites that make it work. The title of this segment is Engaging Parents in Kinship Care and Adoption. And I'd like to do two things. One, I'd like to identify what the prerequisites are that you should expect of the birth parent if they're going to be involved with the children. What are those prerequisites that you need to have in place? And the second thing is, what are the guidelines that you need to have so that you can co-parent with that birth parent? Because there need to be some guidelines and some rules so that the kids don't get caught in the middle. So those are the two things I want to talk about. What are those guidelines and what's realistic in terms of what you need to expect in order to have the birth parents involved? So let me ask you this question first. How many of your children are still involved with their birth parents? Quite a few. Okay. How many feel that their the birth parent is still present even though they're not living with you? Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, even if they're not around, you still feel their presence. And who keeps them alive? It keeps the child, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's what keeps them so present, because of the children being there. So if they're going to be involved, there's some things and there's some expectations that you should have in place that they should be able to meet if they're going to have contact with the children. And it starts off like this. One of the requirements is that they acknowledge and validate you and what your authority is as a caregiver. And I know that's a lot of words there, but they've got to be able to say things like this to their children. Your aunt, your uncle, your adoptive grandparent or aunt are now responsible for taking care of you. They're going to be able to take care of you and be there when you need them. They need to validate your competency. They need to validate that you can do a good job. They need to tell the children that you trust them, so it's okay for them to trust them as well. So that's the very, very important thing, to validate your competency. Number two, defer their authority. They've got to be able to say things to the children like, they're going to take care and protect you the same way I would, and this is the one that's the most important. When they speak for me. That's so crucial if they're going to be involved with the children. They've got to be telling the children that they should listen to you, that you acknowledge their authority. That's what's so important in that. You acknowledge that you, the birth parent, acknowledges your authority, and that you expect the children to acknowledge your authority. And what goes with that is giving the permission to the children to accept your authority. So they need to hear statements like this. I want you to trust and obey them the same way you would trust and listen to me. And the children need the permission. So it's two things. They need to be directed in terms of who's now the boss, who now tells you what to do. It's no longer me. It's aunt, uncle, or grandparents. So that's what they're doing here. And the other thing is telling them that it's okay, that I won't get angry if you listen to them. I won't feel threatened if you follow their rules. So you're giving the children permission. And then you need to ask the birth parents to be persistent. I love your comment. It's like, no, they're not doing it. Okay. I know. That's why it's important to talk about it. Yeah. And that's why I'm listing this. Because in order for the kids not to get caught in the middle and for you to feel like you have some control, these things need to be in place. And these are some things and some agreements that you need to have with the birth parent if you're going to have them involved. And you have a right to expect that for the children's sake. Be consistent. They've got to be able to say, the same rules you follow in your home are the same rules that you'll follow with me. We both want the best for you. Now, that's if they were following the same rules you were, the kids would be with them. So I know that's not realistic, okay? But the kids still need to know that those rules that you have in place are appropriate and that you support them and that you want them to follow them. Even though the kids might say, well, we don't do that at home. That's where that pops up at. We don't do that with mommy. We don't do that with mom. We didn't do that when we lived with them. Mommy wouldn't want me to have to do that if I lived with her. And they may not even ever have lived with mom. But they can fantasize and say, mommy wouldn't want me to go to bed at 8 o'clock if she was here. How do you know? You know? But mommy needs to come back and say, yes, you would if you were with me. Yes, you would have to follow those kinds of rules. That's kind of what that dialogue needs to sound like. And then give the children permission to bond and to trust you. I want you to ask for help with problems the same way you would ask me. You can trust them to help you and care for you the same way I love you. Now that's hard, but they need to know that they can trust you. They have to be given permission to bond. I'll be more specific. They need to be given permission to hug you, to hold you, to kiss you, to say prayers with you, to go to church with you. They need to have permission to be involved in nurturing, caring relationships with you. Have you ever seen, when this hit home for me is I used to go to visits up at Muncie. You know where Muncie is? That's the women's prison. And I would see the mothers with the children, and the children would be with their birth mom, and the birth mom would be saying, oh, I love you, I love you. And then when the children got hurt, who did the children go to for comfort? Grandma. But the whole time that they're going for comfort, they're looking at mom over here, and they're walking this way for comfort. What are they saying? Are you going to be angry at me? Are you still going to love me? And the mothers that were able to pick up on it would say, it's okay, go to grandma. It's okay, let her hug you. It's okay, I won't be mad. You see how all that fits? That's who they went to for protection and for comfort. But it was that birth parent be giving that child permission to say, trust them, it's okay, go to them for comfort. Because the children were doing what they did naturally. They're not used to going to the birth parents for comfort. They were used to going to grandma for comfort. So when that child slipped and fell down and started crying, she's going to grandma, but at the same time, she's looking at mom while she's walking towards grandma because she wanted permission. And it was so strong. It was so intense. It was really a beautiful gesture on the part of that birth parent to be able to say, it's okay, go to grandma. And then you can come back to me when you get through. Or you can come back to me when you finish crying. So it was the whole idea of being able to share and at the same time identify the pecking order. I know she's your grandmom, and that's who you should go to when? First, if there's a problem. So that's what's so important about these rules. Now, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, but usually the birth parents can't do all 5 of those things at the same time. It's really hard. So sometimes you have to go in the opposite direction. Sometimes, all right, I know you can't tell them that I'm competent, but will you at least tell them, will you make sure that you don't tell them that I'm awful? So sometimes it's important for birth parents to know what not to say, as well as knowing what to say. Does that make sense? Or how about this one? Defer authority. The birth parent may have a problem saying they're going to take care of you and protect you the same way I would. When they speak for me. They may not be able to say that, but you may want to ask them to be able to say, well, don't tell them not to listen to me. You can't tell them to listen to me, but please don't tell them not to listen to me. Does that make sense? Okay. How about this one? Giving the children permission to accept the authority. May have a problem saying, I want you to trust and obey them the same way you trust me, but can you at least tell them not to run away? That you want them to stay? and that it's okay for them to stay? Will you at least tell them not to curse me out and swear at me instead of telling them to swear at me? Be consistent. Can you at least tell them, yeah, I don't have those rules and I don't agree with them, but when you're in their house, you need to follow their rules? Can you at least say that much? I don't agree with them. I hated those rules too when I lived there. But in their house, those are their rules. You need to follow them. Or to give kids permission to bond. Okay, I may not be able to tell the kids that they should love you, but can you at least make sure that you don't tell the kids to hate me? And if you hear them say, I hate you, will you at least tell them that that's not right? So sometimes it's important to get them to know what not to say, as well as for them to know what to say. Now, this next part sounds a little strange, but these are things that you need to do and say to them. These are conversations you need to have with the caregiver. With the birth parent. So these are things that a caregiver needs to say to the birth parent. It will mean more to the children if they hear you say, listen to me, trust me, follow the rules, get up when grandma tells them to get up. The children need to know that it's okay with you before they will listen to me, follow my rules. Your child will feel better if they hear you say, you need to get up in the morning and make your bed, just like grandma asked you. The children will listen a lot better to me or their teacher if they hear you tell them that they should listen. They'll trust me more if you say, listen, or that you trust me. You see what the reason why this is so important is because you're recognizing their power and their influence. That's why these statements from you are so important to the birth parent. And the other thing is, you don't have to try to make up for what happened in the past, because so many things can happen in the past that you can't straighten out. But by having those conversations with the birth parents, it kind of puts you back on the even keel again, in terms of how we can work together and what I need from you, and that I recognize your power. That's why those statements are so important, that I need you in order to be successful. Because now this may sound strange, for a lot of birth parents, they feel as though you have more of an advantage over them because you're raising who? Their child. So for you to take that step and to recognize the fact that even though they're with me, I still recognize that you have power and influence and that you're present, even though that you're not here. And it's that recognition that will sometimes motivate them to work with you and not sabotage. Okay? Roles. Now these roles are interesting. The theory behind these roles, the formula behind these roles are, you need to give birth parents the roles that match their parenting skills. I'm matching roles with the parenting, with the birth parent's abilities. And these roles are based on competencies. Sometimes you just want that birth parent to be simply a contact person, a voice over the phone. I'm thinking of the birth parents who are heavy into addiction, that are into a real depression cycle, that are homeless, that don't follow through with visitations. At this point, all you want them to maybe be is a voice on the phone. And maybe that's as far as they can go. And in fact, you may even have to be on the other end of the phone when they're talking to the kids. Okay? I'm seeing the nodding. Okay, right. Because their role simply is to just maintain contacts with the kids. You know what made me think of just contact with the kids is working with kids in foster care, and all they may have is this folded up piece of paper or this folded up letter where they've taped together, and all they have is that contact and that memory with mom and dad. But that gives them a sense of identity and a sense of connection and a sense of belonging. And that's all that picture may represent. That's all that voice may be. And the conversation sounds like this. How you doing, baby? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so good to hear from you. Yeah, okay, honey, I love you. Sounds good to me, sweetie. Take care. Bye-bye. Love you. That's it. That might be all you want from them. Okay? But that might be the best that they're good for at this point in terms of parenting competency. They can give the child a sense of connection and a sense of being loved and a sense of having a parent. All kids need to feel as though they have a parent. They need to feel that connection. Sometimes the next level is maybe being a supportive friend. That conversation sounds like, yeah, baby, how you doing, sweetie? How's everything going? Tell me about what's happening in school. What are the events that's happening in school? All they are is a friend. Have you ever seen caregivers? Have you ever seen birth parents where they're better at being friends with the children than parents? They know all the latest dances. They know all the music. They know all the stars. They can have conversations about technology, but they're not too good at being a parent in terms of setting limits, being role models, being able to discipline. But that's all you want from them to be at this point is a friend. They may not be visiting at this point, but that's all they are, support friend. Now, these are for birth parents who can be a little more than just support. These are birth parents who can actually listen. But all they're doing is, oh yeah, I hear you. Oh, is that what's going on? You know what? It sounds like to me you need to talk to who? Grandma. That's all the conversation sounds like. You get them to talk about it, ventilate it, and then redirect them back to grandma. That's all you want from them. And that's what they're good for. Being a friends, being listening. And if they can agree to that, then you allow them to have the conversations to make that contact. But that's the role. Just read them back, redirect them back, brainstorm with them. It sounds like you need to go back too. And then advisors, these roles here, they're getting pretty sophisticated now. These are the ones you can probably do overnights. They'll probably be able to do day visits, but they can be advisors, problem solvers, disciplinary. And these are the roles that you have when the caregiver, where the birth parent can actually be a parent. But those other roles are the ones that you may want to consider, but it's all about matching the role with their competency. Your guidelines, these are pretty basic. Don't belittle and put each other down in front of the children. Don't send messages back and forth. Don't change or contradict each other without contacting each other. Don't take sides and collude with the children against each other. And then help the children reframe and direct their issues and feelings back to you. Have consistent rules, follow through, make sure they know about the hierarchy, and don't compete by trying to buy their love. This actually comes out of divorce and separation. Okay, all right, because sometimes the relationship with that birth parent is almost as if it's as if you're divorced parents, because they can be so angry. And these are just some basic rules for how to co-parent. So, in summary, you need to let birth parents know what you need from them. They need to know how you need them. They need to know what you need them to do, as well as what you need for them not to do. You need to get back to them and let them know how you need them to be involved in these children's lives. And then you need to come up with some guidelines in terms of how we're going to relate so that we can keep the children out of the middle, so that the children won't manipulate who? Us. A lot of times that's going to be the buy-in.